When talking about the prison industrial complex and the adverse effects of the war on drugs in regard to Black, Latino, and other brown communities in America, it is really important to understand what the prison industrial complex is and how the idea of the prison industrial complex began to form. The roots of the war on drugs can actually be traced back to the Johnson administration and the war on crime. While not exactly the same, it did lay a lot of the framework for the war on drugs that would be used during the Nixon administration. For example, Johnson introduced the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration, which used a lot of funds to keep an eye on lower income areas. And they had these ideas that low income correlated to crime. And unfortunately, low income families happen to be majority Black or Hispanic Americans. So you could not escape. You could not have the idea of low income equals crime without having skin color equaling crime. When Nixon declares the war on drugs, he aimed to target drug use and smuggling and introduce things like the DEA, which is a specialized police force dedicated to stopping drug-related crimes, but his legislation led to extreme punishments for defendants who violated these laws. Jimmy Carter managed to ease up on these a little bit when he got marijuana, which was classified as a Schedule I drug, criminalized in 11 states. But unfortunately, the Reagan administration does bring back a lot of the same policies that Nixon had in place during the beginning of the war on drugs regarding drug possession and distribution. And he doubled down on them federally and highly encouraged state-level legislation to follow suit, which unfortunately led to a boom in incarceration for nonviolent drug charges, as even possession was now a crime. A lot of Reagan's administration was based off the belief that welfare and Social Security were being taken advantage of by lower income citizens. He's the reason why we have the harmful stereotype of the welfare queen, Black woman who uses welfare checks and having kids to take money from the government, which is still prominent or prevalent in society today. To further prove the disadvantage placed on lower class minorities due to the Anti-Drug Abuse Act, there were disproportionate sentences. For example, powder cocaine took a lot more work to produce, and it was circulating white areas more often, but there were shorter sentences put in place for people who got caught with powder cocaine than crack cocaine, which was cheaper to make and cheaper to buy and circulated a lot more amongst Black and brown communities. The disproportionate effects on African American and Latino citizens led to an extreme increase in mass incarceration rates across the country, especially between the 90s and the early 2000s. With how disproportionate the effects were on these communities, especially African Americans, and the overlap of government and corporate interests, the idea of the prison industrial complex was born. There is a structural racism ingrained into the prison institution, and allowing corporations to industrialize and profit off of the extortion of prisoners who were taken advantage of by a set of regulations that works against them. Therein lies parallels to the system of slavery. When coming off of the tail end of the civil rights movement and the declaration of the war on drugs, African Americans were immediately put at a disadvantage in regard to economic, social, and even federal disparities. The legislation passed because of the war on drugs was essentially structuring a game so that the rules work against these disenfranchised communities. Because of the similarities between the institution of the prison system and the system of slavery, and the disproportionate effects on Black people and Black neighborhoods and homes and other people of color, we started to really think about the ethics of the institutions of punishment and the capitalization of one of the essential parts of the justice system. And we began to have conversations of reformation and the ability of the government to pick a group of people and subject them to a culturally, economically, socially perpetual cycle that most often requires generations to break out of.